In a stunning 58-minute blitz, Eala utterly dismantled Coco Gauff, sending shockwaves through a stadium that completely lost its mind. It was the upset of the century that no crystal ball could have predicted. Pundits were blind to it, the grandstands were clueless, and even Gauff looked blindsided. The moment the ball was first tossed into the air, the atmosphere shifted, icy, precise, and crackling with static. This wasn't a standard match for Eala. It was a televised manifesto. Her racket didn't just hit the ball, it sliced through the humidity like a samurai's katana. She met every volley with napalm. You could practically see Gauff's usual cadence disintegrating, her self-assurance eroding with every score, while the spectators leaped to their feet, hungry for blood. Stunned whispers morphed into a deafening thunder. Then, as the match point winner kissed the paint, the momentary hush exploded into absolute bedlam. The record books were torched in that 58-minute clinic, but the spectacle on court masked a darker narrative of crushing expectations, hidden feuds, and silent retribution. True supremacy isn't always flexed muscles and raw force. Often, it is simply the undeniable act of silencing every single doubter. Long before the mayhem ensued, a heavy stillness hung over the court, a weird, suffocating calm that settled in right before the umpire called time. It was that specific type of hush that screams danger is approaching. The world knew Coco Gauff, the wonder kid who had the globe in her palm, shouldering the burden of legacy like she was born for it, a Grand Slam titan and the poster child for the future of the game. Staring her down from the opposite baseline was Eala, stoic, unflappable, a mystery to the casuals and dangerously overlooked by the experts. She wasn't on the billboards, she wasn't the bookie's pick, but she was a hurricane brewing off the radar, quietly constructing a masterpiece in the shadows for months. Endless drills under a scorching sky, midnight film sessions dissecting opponents and battling those inner demons, telling her to quit demons she ruthlessly silenced. Hailing from the Philippines, she represented a land where the sport is played with fiery heart, but rarely guarantees a golden ticket. It is a place where winning feels like an act of defiance against the odds, and losing cuts deep, like a betrayal of hope. Since day one, critics whispered that girls from her archipelago don't climb this high, that the distance was too great, the funding too low, and the spotlight too dim. Yet her drive wasn't just about sticking it to the naysayers. She chased the crown because, in her soul, she knew the throne was already hers. So there she stood, bathed in the harsh glare of the arena, facing down the living embodiment of every ceiling she was told she could never shatter. The marketing dream, the fan favorite, the corporate darling, and a gladiator who knew how to draw blood. On paper, this was a mismatch. Vegas had the odds skewed heavily one way, and the talking heads were already scripting a breezy victory lap for the favorite. But as Eala approached the service line to loosen up, you could see a shift, a silent, burning rage simmering behind her gaze. She hadn't shown up just to fill a bracket slot. She was there to stage a coup. Over in her box, her mentor leaned in with a hushed directive meant for her ears alone. Strip away her fame. Recall your own power. It was less a pep talk and more like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. The audience buzzed with low-level anxiety, anticipating Gauff's usual fireworks, while the paparazzi shutters clicked in a frenzy. Journalists were poised to document a slaughter, but when Eala unleashed that opening serve pure, velocity-laden, and painting the line, the impact echoed like a gunshot, leaving Gauff visibly startled. That very first exchange wrote a prologue that shattered everyone's pre-written scripts. Instead of dancing to the favorite's tune, the underdog was calling the shots. She calculated every strike, moved with lethal intent, and in mere minutes, the stadium's mood swung wildly. Fans who were accustomed to roaring for Gauff's supremacy began to sense a glitch in the matrix. Doubt crept in. The veterans in the stands saw a glint in the challengers' eyes that they knew all too well. It wasn't hubris, and it certainly wasn't fear. It was a tunnel vision, so absolute it felt glacial. That icy stare held the weight of every rejection, every draw where she was treated as filler. This had transcended sport. It was a war cry. Even as the first set unfolded, the masses clung to the hope of a turnaround, as they always did with their hero. Gauff's bounce-back ability was mythical, yet a murmur of disbelief was amplifying with every lost point. Who on earth is she? By the moment Eala cracked the service game wide open, her racket was doing all the talking. Winners left the crowd breathless. Points ended in stunned silence. There were no fist pumps, no grins, just a robotic, terrifying efficiency. The unstoppable force of nature that was Coco Gauff suddenly looked mortal. In those initial 30 minutes, you could feel the tectonic plates of the sport shifting. The eerie calm was evaporating. The explosion was imminent. It started with one exchange, a grueling 41-shot marathon of sheer will that dictates the flow of destiny. It was the type of play that rewrites logic. Gauff's service game had just been obliterated. Gauff hovered at the back, twirling her frame, desperate to break the runaway train, while Eala stared her down like a predator. Stone-faced, unblinking, fueled by a quiet inferno, then the ball was launched with venom. Gauff unleashed her signature velocity into the corner, but Eala scooped it up, sending it deep to the backhand wing. A brutal exchange ensued, forehands, backhands, cross-court daggers. No one blinked. The stadium inhaled sharply with every hit as the velocity ratcheted up to impossible levels. Then came the kill shot. Eala read the geometry, stepped inside the court, and drilled a forehand down the alley so precise it kissed the whitewash. The official's voice sliced the air. Game, Eala. Gauff stood there, paralyzed. The stadium exploded, and you could practically feel the atmosphere shatter. That single stroke didn't just secure a game, it rewrote the entire script. For the very first time, Coco looked rattled. Her gaze darted frantically toward her support team, hunting for answers that weren't there. Her trainer offered a slow, measured clap, but the worry lines on his face screamed the truth. The plan had gone completely off the rails. Across the net, Alex strolled to her bench with ice-cold demeanor, sipping water without a flicker of emotion. The broadcasters scrambled for excuses, suggesting the American was just finding her footing. She is playing out of her skin, one analyst murmured. But they failed to grasp the reality this wasn't a fleeting moment of brilliance. It was calculated warfare. Eala had dissected Gauff's game, identifying every single crack in the armor. She wasn't just blasting hero shots, she played the long game, squeezing the court dimensions until her opponent suffocated under the pressure. The audience, overwhelmingly pro-Coco, started shifting in their seats. Uneasy whispers and anxious clapping rippled through the stands as Alex's shots found the lines. With the scoreboard reading 4-1 in the opener, a fleeting moment altered the entire energy of the contest. After shanking a standard backhand, Gauff let out a primal scream, hammering the ball into the net support. The official slapped her with a warning, silencing the arena instantly. Alex remained stone-faced. She simply pivoted, fixed her gear, and marched back to the service line as if nothing had happened. That split second revealed the true master of the court. The battle had transcended athletics and entered the realm of mental warfare. Every grimace from the American only deepened Eala's tranquility. As Coco tried to ignite her own fury, Alex turned into absolute ice. The difference was jarring. One desperate to find a groove, the other commanding the tempo. The subsequent games flew by in a blur. Her returns were clinical, dissecting the court with surgical precision. She glided across the clay as if gravity didn't apply. When she secured the break for 5-1, a wave of shock hit the spectators. Smartphones shot up everywhere, desperate to document a historic upset in the making. "Are you seeing this?" A spectator yelled from the courtside seats, voice trembling with disbelief. When the set wrapped at 6-1, the storyline had done a complete 180. The broadcast booth was now throwing around terms like unstoppable force and masterclass. Still, not a single grin crossed her lips. She understood the war wasn't won until the final ball was struck. Entering set 2, Coco attempted a reboot. She slowed her breathing and the pace, landing some heavy serves, but momentum is a fickle beast. When the tide turns, it rarely recedes without a fight. The glimmer in Alex's gaze was now a blazing inferno, and by game 4, the American's temper flared once more. She challenged a ruling on a forehand that painted the line. "That was long," Coco screamed, pleading her case. The chair umpires stood firm, boos rained down, thickening the air with hostility. But Eala just gave a curt nod and reset her stance. That sequence shattered any remaining doubts. Luck had nothing to do with it. This was a systematic dismantling. When she consolidated with a blistering ace down the tee, the spectators leaped up, torn between shock and reverence. She was authoring a new legend right before their eyes, making a definitive statement with every single play. In that instant, the Manila native wasn't battling a Grand Slam champion. She was fighting every skeptic who ever said she couldn't. And for once, victory looked inevitable. As the second set progressed, the vibe within the stadium had mutated into something entirely different. A partisan home crowd had transformed into a wild, volatile entity, buzzing with electric tension. A collective gasp of astonishment punctuated the end of every rally. You could practically read their minds. This is impossible. Yet, Alex was a setup and tearing through another service game. Her self-assurance had hardened into absolute command, a silent but lethal form of authority where every step was calculated. Each exchange finished with pinpoint accuracy, yet she offered no theatrics, no shouts, no fist pumps, just business. She merely tweaked her hat and retreated to the line. That eerie calmness whipped the fans into an even greater frenzy. Trailing 2-love, Coco finally unleashed a guttural yell after snagging a scarce point. She gestured wildly to the bleachers, begging for noise. The fans obliged, erupting in chants and raw energy. It felt like a potential turning point, but Alex remained unflinching. Immediately, she sliced a serve out wide, dragged her opponent off the court, and buried a forehand into the open green. The entire sequence took 9 seconds. The stadium held its breath. Then a rhythm started, a faint chant from the nosebleeds. Eala, Eala. It swelled until Coco realized the room wasn't hers anymore. Her shoulders slumped with every concession. Whenever she attempted to fight back, Alex responded with something sharper, faster, and infinitely more ruthless. The internet was already catching fire while the game was still in play. Highlights of Alex's laser-guided forehands and Coco's errors were flooding the timelines. "Who on earth is this?" one user posted. Another chimed in, "She's playing with a massive chip on her shoulder, and she is absolutely delivering." Midway through the second frame, the matchup was trending globally. The voices in the booth were stunned, whispering, "We haven't seen Coco dismantled like this in years." The pressure had spilled over the lines. It was everywhere. The tension was worldwide. Trailing 4-1, Gauff surrendered a double fault. A collective moan swept through the stands as she snapped her head back, letting her irritation show. Ice cold as always, Eala gave the ball 3 rhythmic bounces before firing. Pure heat, another ace. The stadium erupted into chaos. Lenses swept over the spectators, catching a mix of euphoria and disbelief. Up in the box, Eala's squad remained statue still, hands clasped, gazes tracking her every motion like hawks. They sensed the inevitable conclusion approaching. Then, the decisive game began. Coco Gauff stood at the baseline, serving for survival. Fans leaped up, chanting her name, praying for a divine intervention that simply wasn't on the schedule. Eala's return was punishing deep, heavy, and merciless. Coco scrambled, but misfired. Error, championship point. A hush fell over the court as the ball went up. Dead center. Eala's forehand tore across the clay, a screeching blur of kinetic energy. It kissed the paint. Flawless. Game. Set. Match. Eala. The announcement hung in the air, freezing time for a heartbeat before the venue detonated with sound. The arena shook with a deafening roar. Spectators vaulted from their chairs, smartphones raised high, screaming until their lungs gave out. Eala remained motionless for a split second, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the digital display. 58 minutes flat. Coco Gauff approached the net, extending a hand. Eala gripped it solidly, no gloating, no ego, only silent professionalism. Yet the lenses zoomed in, capturing that fleeting twitch in Gauff's face, the raw agitation masked by mandated courtesy. As Eala exited, the thunderous applause trailed her. The audience chanted her name, sensing they had just watched a legend being born. She cast one final look over her shoulder, taking in the scene she had just commanded. Long after the players vanished into the tunnel, the vibrations of the crowd lingered. It felt less like a game and more like a seismic shift. Sharp, abrupt, and impossible to overlook. Coco Gauff sat isolated on the sideline, buried under a towel, trying to process the reality of the moment. For an athlete accustomed to dictating the tempo and the storyline, this wasn't merely a loss on the scorecard. It was pure shock. Within moments, highlights of the blowout saturated every social platform. TikTok feeds filled with super slow-mo cuts of Eala's forehand, clinical cross-court winners, and split-screen reaction shots on infinite loop. One caption dominated the algorithm: 58 minutes, no mercy. The fan base on X split into warring factions immediately. One camp hailed Eala as the next icon, the savior restoring surgical precision and grit to the women's game. The opposing faction labeled her display overly robotic, icy, and borderline rude. Because unexpected supremacy always breeds uneasiness, Gauff's loyalists scrambled for excuses to rationalize the beatdown. She appeared exhausted. She was conserving power for the next tournament. Yet internally, they knew fatigue wasn't the culprit. It was a total loss of command. At the post-game media session, Gauff plastered on a smile. She was unstoppable. I just couldn't locate my groove out there. However, her gaze betrayed her. Strained, far away, still reeling. The anger wasn't directed at Eala. It was directed at that terrifying impotence every competitor dreads when your peak performance falls short. Then Eala stepped up to the mic, serene, modest, and looking a bit stunned by the flashbulbs. Her opening statement was barely a whisper. I focused on sticking to my strategy. I have massive respect for Coco. She's elite. I never anticipated a scoreline like this. That modesty only turned up the volume on the chatter. Pundits analyzed every syllable and twitch. Was she minimizing the season's most shocking upset? One reporter posed the question. Another shot back, no, that's just wisdom beyond her age. Yet behind the curtain, murmurs began to circulate, the type that ignites scandals. Gossip spread that Gauff had stormed off without a proper word to Eala. Others insisted the handshake was frosty. Then, a brief clip emerged online. It showed Gauff fleeing the court while Eala pivoted to the bleachers, waving to the fans. That split second sparked a firestorm. Headlines screamed, sportsmanship or snub. Gauff exits stage left after Eala's historic triumph. A rivalry ignited, the web devoured the drama. Supporters picked their fighters. Flame wars erupted in the comments, pushing hashtags like Team Star and Team Gauff to the top of the trending list simultaneously. While the fans bickered, analysts began probing the uncomfortable truths. Was the torch being passed? Had Gauff's psyche cracked? Or was this merely a singular, catastrophic afternoon? Crucially, was Eala prepared for the glare of the fame she had just seized? Back in Manila, throngs congregated in shopping centers and public courts to rejoice. Kids sported headbands with AE scrawled in marker. The local press dubbed it the most significant Filipino victory in the modern era of the sport. In a televised segment, her first mentor remarked, "She always promised she would take down the giants eventually. I just never imagined it arriving this quickly." The criticism, however, refused to die down. Detractors argued her reaction was too stoic, demanding more visible passion. Others blasted the audience for disrespecting Gauff by cheering too wildly for Eala's points. It seemed as though absolute mastery was now an offense. Eala, however, offered no rebuttal. The following morning, she was back at practice, silent, locked in, and unfazed. To her, the hurricane raging outside the court was irrelevant. Her entire world narrowed down to the rhythmic thud of felt against hardcourt, knowing full well that the roaring crowd and the media frenzy were temporary. Yet the record books were permanent. Silence inevitably returned, just as the cheering always subsides. As the viral posts dwindled and the news cycle shifted, the chaotic debate settled into a stark, undeniable reality. This victory for Eala was no fluke, nor was it merely a case of Gauff having an off night. It stemmed from a profound transformation, born of months spent evolving in the shadows, fueled by an obsession the cameras never captured. Her camp had spent weeks dissecting Gauff's game with surgical precision. They mapped every serve trajectory, timed her footwork, and noted every subtle tick, constructing a game plan rooted in discipline. The plan was to let Coco swing freely and aggress, only to strike back the moment a gap appeared, genius masquerading as calm. Yet, the real differentiator for Eala that evening wasn't the X's and O's, but her unwavering conviction. She stepped onto the baseline, refusing the title of dark horse, playing not with hope, but with expectation. In a quiet moment with her trainer afterward, she confessed she wasn't trying to shock the world, but rather to validate her own place in it. That sentiment reverberated across the sporting landscape. perfectly encapsulating the magic the spectators had just seen. It was the sight of an athlete claiming her destiny, while Gauff accepted the defeat with characteristic dignity. Speaking to the press later, she admitted that such defeats serve as a wake-up call that a rival is always outworking you. Calling it fuel for the fire, she offered a smile that didn't quite mask the heavy layer of determined respect underneath. Even the commentators changed their tune, with many heralding the dawn of a fierce new competition. Some saw a shifting hierarchy, where Eala was finally mentioned without the usual qualifiers attached to her name. The labels of up-and-coming or promising vanished. She was here, though that arrival brought a heavier burden. Amidst the clamor, she stayed grounded, avoiding grand proclamations or engaging in the online frenzy. Her only public acknowledgement was a brief digital note expressing gratitude for the faith placed in her. Acknowledging the grind was far from over, she left it at that, a humble statement masking the ferocity of that 58-minute rout. It signified a metamorphosis, where Eala stepped over the threshold separating mere talent from true dominance. The question shifted from, who is this girl, to what is her limit? And the answer was becoming increasingly obvious. This shocking upset wasn't a conclusion, but the prologue to a legend, one that remained on everyone's lips for weeks. That 58-minute earthquake turned a standard bracket match into a moment etched in memory. It was the sort of display that fundamentally alters the unspoken laws of the game. For Eala, the evening represented an existential shift, entering the arena as a long shot and exiting as an icon. Aspiring athletes from the Philippines to Spain suddenly found a new figurehead for their ambitions. She stood as living evidence that greatness has no geography and that conviction can span continents. The sport wasn't reserved for the elite, a narrative bolstered by Gauff, who refused to wither after the defeat. She absorbed the blow and converted it into drive, offering a straightforward reply when questioned about Eala later. Recognizing her opponent's unique talent, she promised a fiercer battle next time, speaking with determination rather than spite. Their trajectories were bound to intersect once more, while pundits dubbed the event the Manila Miracle. Statisticians pored over the data. 58 minutes, 18 winners, 4 aces, and a mere 6 mistakes. Yet spreadsheets failed to quantify the evening's spirit, for Eala's feat was less about mechanics and more about sheer force of will. Entering without fear and leaving an indelible mark, she created one of those rare watershed moments in athletics. Before the first serve, she was a hopeful contender. By the handshake, she was a formidable reality. She had authored a fresh chapter solely her own, yet remained remarkably unchanged beneath the media storm. Avoiding theatrical soundbites or pats on the back, she maintained a silent, steady focus. When a child asked her about handling stress at a subsequent appearance, she explained that a lifetime of being overlooked had prepared her. With nothing left to be afraid of, her statement circulated widely, resonating for its raw honesty rather than volume. She had alchemized doubt into high-octane fuel and modesty into strength, beginning a saga that is far from finished. Discussions and clips inevitably circle back to that instant the globe learned that brilliance isn't always loud. Occasionally, it enters silently, commands the room, and steals the air from our lungs. Perhaps that explains why rewatching the footage still raises the hair on our arms. Forget the brutal scoreboard. Focus on the earthquake it triggered. This wasn't merely a 58-minute demolition job. It was the exact second a new conviction ignited. While some victories merely polish a trophy case, others rewrite the history books. So, was this a fleeting shock to the system, or the opening shot of a war destined to rule the court for a decade? We want to hear your take. Sound off in the discussion area below. If that 58-minute display of perfection sent shivers down your spine, smash that like button and subscribe immediately, because in this arena, the next volcano is ready to blow.